So showing so many Harper Golf images out there, and I'm sure there's so many that we haven't seen yet. But do you have one that you just resonates with you so much that you really love looking back on?
Oh gosh, well, all the World Showcase things he did, particularly the illustration of how the architecture would work one next to another, because that was a very hard thing to convince our own Disney management that those things could relate to one another. Putting Japan next to Italy or something like that, and so the fact that Harper could illustrate that and show how easily and compatible it was really made it possible for us to convince everybody that it would work. And also then to go out to the different countries and say, here's how this is going to work. Yeah.
In your presentation, you talked about some of the countries that were inspirational behind the various scenes throughout the Adventurelands. Are there some that are more prominent in some of the domestic parks or the other parks than others? I mean, do some countries, Adventurelands, take more influence from one place than another?
Not by this time. I think it's kind of a smorgasbord of different places in the world and different landscape from different parts of the world. The wonderful thing about Bill Evans is he knew all those plants, where they came from. He traveled to many of those places, and one thing I didn't include was on occasion he brought back some seeds in his pockets, and of course you can't do that.
I was going to say travel was different in those days, right?
It was, right, and so it gave an authenticity to the whole Jungle Cruise. And in different parts of the world, I mean, building a Jungle Cruise here is in many ways easier than in California. And in Hong Kong, the biggest problem we have in the Jungle Cruise is the jungle taking over, and the weather and the amount of rain and everything. And it really is quite an issue, because we have to keep it so that the guests can see things, but at the same time you want that whole feeling of being in the jungle.
There was mention of Iran once being planned for Epcot World Showcase. Are there other countries that you felt were a loss that didn't ever quite make it into World Showcase, but that had been talked about?
Oh gosh, we pitched. One of the problems with doing an international project is that all those countries are members of the Bureau of International Expositions, and their rules are you can only be in a expo or a fair for 1 year. And so when it comes to something like Morocco, the king said, I don't care about that. We're going to be in this project. But most of the other countries are really companies in those countries that are representing the country for that reason.
Now with like Adventureland, we've seen so many concept arts for all the different attractions like Tiki Room and Jungle Cruise. How long from concept to reality did that take, especially for the original Disneyland?
It was probably Disneyland. We used to say it was a year and a day from the start of construction at Disneyland to opening. And so that meant that, for example, for the Jungle Cruise, the huge trees that Bill Evans was able to get because they were building the Santa Ana Freeway or Pershing Square in downtown Los Angeles, where they would call Bill and say, Bill, we've got these great specimen trees. You can have it if you can get here tomorrow and take it out. Otherwise, we're cutting it down. And he had enough context, so he was able to get great specimens for the parks. But different attractions take different amounts of time. Typically, though, a really big attraction takes about 4 years to do from beginning to end. But in the case of the Tiki Room, it was much less than that. And the fastest ever was It's a Small World for the World's Fair, which UNICEF contacted Walt and made the deal 11 months before the fair opened. And that whole attraction was done in 11 months.
You talked about the simpler nature of the early technology used to move the animals on the original Jungle Cruise. What direction have you seen that move in over the years in terms of using technology in Adventureland, where you try to blend in more with nature and look less like you're using technology?
When I go back and talk to the Imagineers, which I do from time to time, I always say I'm really jealous because the storytelling you're doing now, you have amazing tools to use that we never had before. And it's wonderful to be able to have all that technology to use wherever you use it. And we try to keep the technology behind the scenes because unless it's directly part of the story. If it's part of the story, then you want people to see it. But for the most part, you want it hidden. And the so-called the magic to be able to, how did they do that? And that's part of the business, I think.
Are the Imagineers able to fool you at this point in your career or your retirement?
Not all. But I think some of the things they did, for example, Pirates of the Caribbean in Shanghai is extraordinary. What the boat can do, the boat can move basically in any direction you want. And the seamless blend between big sets and film is quite extraordinary today. Things you can do digitally that you can never do before in an attraction are possible today because of digital technology.
What do you think it is about the Jungle Cruise that makes it just still so popular today with guests?
Well, you're really going into an environment that's a good part of the story, and the environment is convincing, very convincing. You're in a jungle, right? And then you add the humor on top of it from the operators, and that gives it a lot of story and fun and people to play off, and it's all about the guest experience. And when you can put people in an environment that's so authentic, that is really a great opportunity.
There's so much emphasis these days on computer-generated technology and simulation, as opposed to the years past where there was a lot of dark rides, audio animatronics, and so on and so forth. Do you feel like that the attractions of the past could benefit from being updated with newer technology, such as simulation, or do you prefer to keep them in their classic?
Well, everything depends upon the story you're trying to tell, and sometimes you can tell the story very simply. I'll mention doing It's a Small World in 11 months. There was basically a rule that you couldn't do anything where you had to invent new technology because there wasn't time. So everything had to be something you could buy off the shelf, basically, in order to make those characters work. But now we make sure that we have enough time so we can figure out the best possible way to do something. And that's really the key, because there's no one way to do any of these things. Figuring out how to do the most often a complicated idea, make it simple. Whatever the story is, how do we communicate that to the public? It can be very simple things. I was on the Norway ride this week, and those characters, the animation is really terrific, and it's very simple stuff.
Absolutely. I know a lot of things going on are now popping with newer generation.
You were showing video of other folks taking the wheel of the Jungle Cruise. Have you ever done it yourself? I don't know that I've seen a picture of it.
No, I don't think I'd be a very good operator. I did. I used to at Disneyland Christmas parties. I used to drive the one of the vehicles, often the double-deck bus, and it was very interesting to me because people don't think they can get hurt in one of our parks, and here's this big bus coming very slowly down the street, and they don't move. People don't move, and it was very difficult, very difficult. And I had a new appreciation for the operators.
Is that something that has remained constant throughout the history of the parks that you've experienced, or has it changed over the years where folks have gotten even less careful around the buses, for example?
No, I just don't think they, and fortunately our record is such that there's no issue here, but I don't think they think about, they think they're very safe in the park, and they are. And safety is always the first concern. I think in many ways Disney's paranoid about that in a good way, because that's the worst thing that can happen to a family. One of the things I always talk to the operators about too was they always have to remember that for the guests, that family, it may be the only time they ever come to one of these parks, and making that experience as wonderful for them as possible is so important. You have to think about that they may not be able to come back. They may be from Australia or Japan or something, wherever. And I think I always said the operators we do wonderful designs, wonderful stories from Imagineering, but the operators are on the front lines all the time, and they can make or break an experience. And the Jungle Cruise operator probably, you'd probably say that's one of the most important from that standpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.